This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Designs. If the name sounds familiar, that's because it's my design business and the work I do there helps make this podcast possible. If you love colorful and whimsical art prints, greeting cards, and journaling stickers, then head over to my Etsy shop for a delightful browse. Just search for Fine Lime, like the fruit, designs, all one word, on Etsy, or click the link in the show notes. And now, on with this week's episode. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I am your host, Melissa, and this week I am tackling a big topic that I know is probably something many of you have dealt with, and it's one that is something that I have personally struggled with many times over the course of my career, and that is creative burnout. So if you have never experienced creative burnout, I really hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it is probably something that you will come across at some point in your creative career, unfortunately. It tends to be one of those things that we don't think about until it actually happens, and it can be kind of hard to prevent it until you go through it. It is preventable, but if you don't know what to watch out for, it can be a little tricky to prevent it. I kind of liken it to you're out for a walk and there's a big boulder in your way and you trip over it. The boulder wasn't there before, but there it is now, and you trip over it and you fall and you skin your knee. And you get up, you put a Band-Aid on your knee, and you keep going. And then the next time you go out, you trip over the boulder again and you fall and you skin your knee again, only this time the original scab hasn't quite healed. But that's okay, you just pop another Band-Aid on and you keep going. And then a few months later, you hit the same trail again and boom, you fall over the boulder again and you skin your knee again. And again, it's a scab that just keeps getting ripped open and you just keep putting a Band-Aid on, but you never actually address the root cause, which is the freaking boulder. If you just moved the boulder out of the way, you wouldn't skin your knee over and over again and have to put a Band-Aid on it. So what we're going to be talking about today is I'm going to start out with telling you a little bit about my personal experience with creative burnout, because I had a doozy of a time with it several years ago. And in order to overcome it, I really had to learn how to stop everything and rip my life apart and put it back together again. It basically remove all the boulders, and so that I would stop skinning my knee. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story in the hopes that maybe some of you can relate to it. But then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how you can actually clean up all that gravel and all those boulders so that you don't keep tripping over them and having to put Band-Aids on your knees. So I hope that's an analogy that makes a little bit of sense. I couldn't figure out how else to word it, but essentially what often happens with burnout is we don't address the real issues. We just put Band-Aid solutions on it. And so it tends to come back. And every time it comes back, it tends to take an even deeper hold on us than it did the time before, till you get to a point where it can be quite detrimental to your career. And that's exactly what happened to me. So So we're just diving right into this episode today. It's a solo episode, by the way. I'm here all by myself. Sam the dog is with me, so you might hear him moving around in the background. So I first experienced I'm not even sure when I first experienced creative burnout. It's something that I have gone through multiple times in my career, and every time it has gotten a little bit worse. But I always seem to be able to get control of it and squelch it down and keep moving. And that worked really well until about 2015. I was starting to feel a bit bogged down and tired and not quite feeling it, but we were in the middle of prepping for a very big live event that we used to put on in my previous business. It was a 3-day conference that we put on, and it was being held in Montreal, and I live in Vancouver. So we were doing a lot of travel back and forth between Vancouver and Montreal in preparation. And whenever you're putting on an event of this size, there is just so much going on that you don't really have time to think about what's going on inside you. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that tends to be what happens. You're going at full tilt. And this becomes even more so the closer you get to the event. So the event was at the end of October, and that basically meant that August, September, and all of October were us going at full steam. And what happens when you're doing that is you're running on adrenaline. Like, adrenaline just kicks in and carries you through to the finish line. And that's what was happening. And unfortunately, when you hit the finish line, the adrenaline stops and you crash. And I crashed really hard. I just fell into this complete chasm of burnout. I just didn't have any interest. I didn't have a creative bone in my body. I was tired. I just couldn't think of anything that really made me want to create, or I couldn't think of anything interesting to create or do. And it just became a real slugfest. And unfortunately, it didn't get better. What happened was I sort of rode that wave through the holiday season into January. And then when January hits, I have always been prone to seasonal depression. January is the worst month of the year for me. And that certainly happened that January. And so battling seasonal depression and dealing with creative burnout was not a good combination. And everything just started to spiral into a big mess. I was having issues in my personal life with my relationship, and I was having issues in my work life, and I was having issues at home in terms of looking after my dad. And I just found myself in a pit, in a very dark pit. And even the things that normally help me battle seasonal depression, a big one for me is exercise, they just weren't working. And I just was feeling completely miserable. And I remember it was around April of 2016, and I had an argument with my boyfriend at the time on the phone. And I got off the phone and I was just so bummed out. And I just sort of thought to myself, like, I am so unhappy and I don't know what to do about it. And I had a bit of a revelation in that moment. I remember very clearly I was sitting on a rock in a park near my house, just feeling so defeated and just feeling like nobody cares if I'm happy or not. Nobody cares. And I heard this voice inside me. I don't know where it came from, but it just sort of said to me, Melissa, the only person responsible for your happiness is you. If you're not happy, you're the one who needs to change that. And it was kind of an epiphany for me, because it's true. It's true. The only person whose job it is to make us happy is ourselves. We're the only person who can do it. Hopefully you are surrounded by people who are going to support you in your quest for happiness. But I realized it's not my boyfriend's job. It's not my business partner's job. It's not my friend's job. It's not my family's job. The only person whose job it is to make sure I'm happy is me. And if I'm not happy, I need to take responsibility for that and I need to change it. And that was kind of the moment where I realized I need to fix this and I need to figure it out. And that set me on the path of basically ripping my life apart, trying to figure out what needed to change. And I basically came to a complete stop. I just put up a stop sign and said, done. Just going to remove everything and start putting the pieces back one after the other. And that's what I did. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I did in order to help me with that. And they're all very simple things. One of the things I also realized is that the Band-Aids don't work. All they do is allow you to scab over until the next time you fall. So I had to go remove the things that were causing me to fall. And that's part of what I did. And it was a very slow process. I would say that from the time I really fell into that deep tunnel at the end of October, although to be quite honest, it probably started months before that, but because I was so running on adrenaline, I don't think I picked up on it in the way that I might have if that hadn't been the case. So from the end of October of 2015, I would say it took me until the end of 2016 before I really felt like my old self. April was the lowest point, and from then on I started to crawl back out, but it was a very slow process and I had to deal with a lot of things internally and externally to make it happen. I had to change my habits. I had to put boundaries in place. I had to start treating myself like an athlete. And I'm going to get into that in a minute, because if you know me, you know I'm not an athlete. But we're going to talk about athletes in a few minutes. So that's what I had to do. And it was not easy. And I had to ask for help a few times, which is really hard for me. And I had to stop letting other people's moods and wants and demands to be an influence on me. So that's a little bit about why this is something that I feel so personally and why I feel it's really important to champion things like self-care, which is, I hate the term self-care. I really hate it. It makes my skin crawl. But it's a term that's very popular right now, and so I am probably going to use it a few times during this episode, but I hate it. But basically, how to look after myself and how to put myself first. And, you hear that old adage that when you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks fall down, your job is to put your mask on first before you put somebody else's mask on for them, and how that relates to life in general. And it's very true, but it's very hard to do, especially if you're a people pleaser or if you're somebody. It's really hard if you're a mom. I'm not a mom. I see my mom friends do it all the time, and I completely get it. When you're a mom, you want your kids to be first, but sometimes that can backfire. So we're going to get into all of that today too. And I hope that this helps you all. I hope I'm going to give you some very actionable tips. This is actually based on a presentation that I have given a few times at different talks and conferences and workshops. That's usually quite well received. And I hope that it can help you, particularly for those of us who are in creative fields, because burnout can be really detrimental to our businesses, which provide us with our living, if we don't get a handle on it and learn how to deal with it. So let's get into the meat of this now that you know a little bit about where I'm coming from. One of the things to understand is that burnout can happen to anybody. You don't have to be a creative to feel burnout. It can happen in any career. It can even happen when you create as a hobby. The thing is, though, when you feel burnt out and it's your hobby, you have the luxury of being able to put it down and move on to something else that sparks creativity in you, or that switches it up, or brings you a little inspiration, or brings you back to life. But when you create for a living, we don't have that luxury. And I've stated this before on the podcast, that creating for a living is very different from creating just for the pure enjoyment of creating. Because when you create for a living, you are creating for clients, for customers, for people who are going to buy what it is that you're creating or making. And so when you are creatively burned out, that can have a direct impact on your income. And when your income is threatened, that brings on a whole other level of stress in your life. You start to worry about whether you can pay the bills. You start to worry about whether you're going to be able to put food on the table. If you've got kids and a mortgage, those worries are even bigger because you have more mouths to feed than if you're on your own. And so it can be really scary. And what that does is it creates more stress. And when you have more stress, that contributes to the feelings of burnout. Like, it all starts to compound on one another, and it can start to swirl you down into a dark hole very quickly. And it can be really hard to pull yourself back out because you're constantly cycling. It's like going down a drain, just spinning, going further down, and you can't seem to spin yourself back out of it. So it's hard when you create for a living. It is really difficult to go through something like that because it has such a direct impact on every aspect of your life. One thing I do want to mention is that creative burnout and creative block are not the same thing. So this is really important to understand. Creative block usually happens by sitting down and doing the work. Like, very often we think we're blocked because, we sit down and we just kind of like look at the screen and we don't know what to write, or we don't know what to draw, or we don't know what to paint. That blank screen, that blank canvas can be very intimidating no matter how much you create. There's always that moment where you have to look at the blank screen and go, I don't know. But very often almost always creative block can be solved by just sitting down and forcing yourself to make a mark, whether it's on a page, whether it's on a canvas, wherever it is. It's just a matter of making the first mark and creating something, even if it's crap. Usually that will get your juices flowing. On the other hand, creative burnout is very different because very often sitting down and trying to push through can actually make it worse. I find personally that creative block I tend to be able to solve by just sitting down and forcing myself to get on with it. And you'll notice other things, like when you're creatively blocked, you still feel inspired, you still want to create, you just don't know where to start. With creative burnout, you will often find yourself not feeling it at all. You don't want to create, you don't know what to create, you don't care. Some of the symptoms that you might notice with creative burnout: you are suddenly disinterested, you're apathetic, you feel lethargic when it comes to your work, feeling uninspired. And we all go through bouts of feeling uninspired, but usually they pass, or you're able to fill your creative well quickly and get back to work. But when those feelings of inspiration just kind of lag on for weeks and don't really seem to go away, that's a sign of creative burnout. Another symptom that you might notice is that you are short-tempered, frustrated, or irritated with clients or customers who you would normally enjoy working or interacting with. So again, to be clear, we all have those clients who get under our skin a little bit. We all have those really silly customer messages that make you shake your head or get you a little frustrated. We all have those. I'm talking about feeling frustrated or angry or short-tempered with the people who normally are a joy to work with. And we all have clients and customers who we love them. And if you start to notice that you're not loving them so much, that's probably you, not them. Another sign sign can be resenting your audience. So this could be, your Instagram audience, your social media followers, the people who quite frankly probably fill your coffers so you can pay your bills. When you start to resent them and the space they take up in your life, that's another sign that you might be creatively burned out. Mood swings is another sign of creative burnout. And at its very worst, you might start to experience issues with sleeping, eating, or even depression. And so, as I mentioned before, when you are creating for a living, feelings of burnout can trigger even more feelings of stress and anxiety. And it just creates a perfect storm for additional mental health issues. And those could be things like depression. And if you are in a situation where you are noticing signs and symptoms of depression, or you're struggling in any way with your mental health, do not be afraid to reach out for professional help. Make an appointment with your doctor. Go talk to them. Let them know what's going on, what you're struggling with, and see if you can get some help. There is nothing wrong with doing that. You should never feel bad about it. This is just as important as your physical health. And mental health can impact your physical health. So please, if you are struggling, go talk to somebody who can help you. So one of the other things I want to talk about before I get into what you can do to help you with issues of burnout is I want to talk about understanding our creative rhythms. And this is so important, especially if you're a newer creative who hasn't been doing this for that long. Because I certainly know when I first started out, I had these feelings of despair almost when I would finish a project and I wasn't ready to start a new project. I was feeling very uninspired and I would just kind of freak out like I'm never going to have another good idea again. And this falls into what's known as creative rhythm. And we all have a slightly different creative rhythm, but at its heart, our creative rhythm is like a series of waves on the ocean. And the first person I heard speak about it like this was photographer David Duchemin. He has a whole blog post on it that he wrote back in 2014, and I will put a link to it in the show notes. It's really worth reading, and I found it extremely helpful. But essentially what he talks about in the article is that creativity has highs and lows, and that's perfectly normal. The highs are when you're inspired and the work is exciting and you feel like you're riding this beautiful wave and it's just salt spray and beaches and sunshine and you're just in the flow, you're in the zone. We've all had those moments of just feeling like we're in the creative zone. And the lows are when you've exhausted your creative well and you feel like you're spent and uninspired. Basically, your low is when the wave crashes onto the sand. You've ridden the wave out and you've landed on the beach, and that's that. You're grounded. And the point of it is that you can't have the creative high without the creative low. They go together like peanut butter and jelly. The beautiful thing about this, and this is what it takes a lot of us a long time to understand, it took me several years before I started to have a confidence in this, is that just like the ocean, when one wave comes into shore, there's always another wave behind it. Go sit at the beach this summer and watch the waves come in. Even if it's a perfectly calm day, there will still be some wave action. And just as one comes in and rides out its journey, another one comes up behind them. And it's kind of funny because as I was dealing with this massive burnout in 2015 and 2016, one of the final things I did that really helped me push me back to feeling like myself was I took my first vacation in 7 years. Like, yes, don't go 7 years without a vacation. It's not a mark of pride or I don't know. It's silly to take a vacation, even if it just means staying in your own home. But I took a vacation and I went to Tofino during storm watching season in what has become an annual tradition for me. And I remember being out walking on the beach with my dog, and it was pouring with rain and the waves were just amazing. And even in the middle of November, there are tons of surfers in Tofino. And I just remember walking along the beach and I could see them all out there in their black wetsuits. They just look like little birds bobbing along there, sitting on their surfboards. And I was just watching them and they were just so chill, waiting for the next wave. They had ridden the previous wave out. They'd come up on the beach and then they'd got back on their surfboards and they'd paddled back out and they just sat there and they waited. Like they weren't stressed out over it. They were chatting to each other. They were just watching the birds or whatever, but they just sat there and patiently waited for that next wave to come in because they knew it was coming. They knew the next wave was coming. And this is what happens with creative burnout or with our creative rhythms, is that it takes a little while before we trust that the next wave is going to come. But I promise you, it's going to come. It is going to come. So once you learn to trust that, you will enjoy riding the waves even more, and you will learn to enjoy when you just land on the beach and when you paddle back out and wait for the next wave. You will learn to enjoy that downtime, and you will learn to understand that that downtime is not burnout. It is simply your creative rhythm and just waiting for the next wave to come. That's the point where you fill your creative well, where you work on other things, and you just wait it out because it'll come. Okay, so now that we've got that all out of the way, let's talk about what to do when you start to feel those symptoms of burnout that I mentioned earlier. So, like I mentioned, the thing I had to do was I had to stop. I had to stop everything. I had to just put the world on hold for a little bit and take a step back and start to figure out where the problems were. I had to figure out where all the boulders were because I needed to remove them. And one of the first things that you can do in order to identify where the boulders are, because sometimes the boulders, sometimes they're invisible. You know, when you're walking down the sidewalk and you trip for no reason and you sort of look behind you to see what it was that made you trip and it was just yourself. That's what we're talking about here. So you need to take a look to see what's tripping you up. And there's a list of questions that you can ask yourself, and I will put these in the show notes as well. But here's a few of them. First off, when was the last time you took a proper vacation? So I mentioned that for me, it had been over 7 years, which is unacceptable. So when I say a proper vacation, I mean a vacation where you shut down work, not one where you kind of work half time or you do a few hours here and there. I'm talking about one where you shut everything off and remove yourself from your business. When was the last time you did that? If it has been more than a year, it is time to sit down and schedule a vacation. And I know that with COVID and everything that's been going on, a lot of us have put off vacations and a lot of us have been in very high stress situations with family at home and dealing with parents and all kinds of things that have made it really difficult. So it's been hard to shut everything off, but things are opening up now. And all that stuff we dealt with in COVID is what's making it even more important for us to take time out to have a vacation. And I know that the economy right now, I know how expensive everything is getting, but even if it's just staying at home, you need to shut your business down for at least a week. You need to have like that full-on time to allow yourself to decompress, relax, and then start to ramp up to go back. I don't even think a week is long enough. I think for most of us, we need a minimum of 2 weeks, 3 if you can manage it. When was the last time you completely unplugged for social media for more than a few hours? I'll let you think about that for a moment. Has it been a while? If it's been a while, you need to think about how you can make that a priority and make it a priority on a regular basis. When was the last time you had a decent night's sleep? Sleep plays a huge role in our body's ability to think, our body's ability to heal itself. Like, it's crazy what lack of sleep can do to us. So when was the last time you had a decent night's sleep? And I know if you've got young children, the answer to that is probably going to be you don't remember. And I get it. But still ask yourself the question, are you eating properly? What we put in our body has a direct impact on how we feel. Are you moving your body every day? Every day. When I say moving, I don't mean getting up from your chair and walking to the kitchen. I'm talking about actual movement. Do you actually like what it is you're doing? This is a big one. Does what you are doing in your business, do you actually like it? Does it fit your values and your life goals? Those are really big questions to ask, and the answers can be a little bit scary, but you do need to ask yourself those questions every now and then. You need to check in and make sure that your business and your life values and goals meet somewhere. And we did an episode on this recently. I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. Are you creating good work, or are you simply phoning it in just to get the job done? A lot of us do this with clients. We realize that that's one sure sign that I'm burnt out. I'm just dialing it in. I'm good enough at my job that I can do a good job and deliver it to the client, but the work is not inspired. The work is not interesting. I'm just getting it done. Am I feeling blue, depressed, anxious, or stressed out? If you're feeling any of those symptoms, that's when you need to probably check in with your doctor or a therapist or a health professional and talk to them, because those are signs that something is going on. So as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the episode, burnout can be a cycle if you don't make long-term changes. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about in this episode, is the long-term changes that you have to start to make. And I think what happens is a lot of us have really good intentions, and most of the things I'm going to tell you today are not earth-shattering. They're not new. They're not like the secret to life. Most of them are very boring. I kind of liken it to maintenance on a car. There is nothing sexy about taking your car for an oil change, but if you don't take your car for regular oil change, you're going to pay for it later with a car that is not running properly. And that's what happens when it comes to dealing with things like burnout. You have to be doing the daily maintenance in order to avoid the disaster down the road. One of the things that helped me the most was learning to think of my body as a professional tool. Okay, and as artists and creatives and makers, we all have tools that we use. It could be your paintbrushes, it could be your knitting needles, it could be your markers, it could be your pen, it could be your computer. We all have tools that we need to use, and it's up to us to make sure those tools are in good working order so that we can create the best work possible. And the thing that we need to start thinking about is that our body is just as much a professional tool as our paintbrush, as our needles, as our Cricut machines. The thing is, though, you don't get to just trade it in when it's not working well. You can't just go out and buy a new body like you can with a computer. Or when I wanted to throw my Cricut out the window and I went and bought a Silhouette instead. You can't do that with your body. But if you don't look after it and you start neglecting it, then you're going to be stuck with a mess. So I started to look at it from the perspective of a professional athlete. So I think we can all appreciate that professional athletes rely so much on their physical bodies. If they have an injury, that impacts their earning power. It impacts their career. It could be career ending for some people. For a professional athlete, their body and its ability to perform on the playing field, both physically and mentally, it's crucial to their ability to earn a living doing what they love and what they're good at. And we are no different. Any injury, physical or mental, can be the end of their playing career. And it's the same for us. And unfortunately, we don't tend to value it in the same way that a professional athlete does. Professional athletes know that to be at their best, they need to fuel their bodies, they need to warm up their bodies, and they need to rest their bodies. They work with teams of people who help them perform at their peak. They have doctors and physiotherapists, massage therapists, nutritionists, dietitians, sports psychologists, and coaches, even specialist coaches. Like there are hitting coaches and defensive coaches and dryland coaches and goalie coaches, base running coaches. You get the idea. And the other important thing to recognize is athletes have seasons. They can't keep up the grueling pace that they put their bodies through for 365 days. It's impossible. So they have off seasons. And this is where they rest, they recalibrate, and they rehabilitate. How many of us are doing those things? Because when you work for yourself, your body is no different than that of a professional athlete. The exact same principles apply because your body is your business. If it doesn't work, neither do you, and then you're hooped. So this is why you need to think about these things. Do you do these things consistently? Do you move your body regularly, multiple times a day? Do you give your body good fuel so that it can run properly? What do you eat every day? Do you give your body rest and recovery time beyond a good night's sleep? Do you prioritize your mental health? Or do you get specialist care, or do you have specialist coaches who can help you? Do you perform regular maintenance on your body on a regular basis? So let's dive into each of those all a little bit more. Let's talk about moving your body multiple times a day. So as humans, our bodies are designed to move constantly. We're not meant to be sitting or standing in one place for long periods. And you've probably all heard that sitting is the new smoking. But to be very honest, standing isn't much better for you either in one spot. And I know this from many years in retail. It's quite painful to stand for long periods of time. But we're not talking about running marathons here. And we're not even talking about going to the gym every day. But you do need to get up and move. It gets your blood flowing, and when your blood starts flowing, your mind starts clicking. So it can be as simple as going out for a 30-minute walk every day or twice a day, even better. It could be stopping once an hour to do some jumping jacks in your studio, or to walk the dog, or walk down to the post office to ship some orders. I found that getting a step counter was really helpful to me, not so much because I was so focused on the 10,000 steps a day, but it gave me a baseline to be able to see how much I was actually moving on a normal day and to figure out where I could make small changes to increase that movement. So I have found ways to incorporate walking into my day every day. I have a dog, so that really helps. He's a big dog, so we go for long walks. But I also started to look at how many errands I could do without my car. And I live 5 minutes away from a little plaza that has a post office and a coffee shop and a couple of restaurants, and the library is nearby. And there's 2 rec centers within a 10-minute walk of me in both directions. And I just started thinking like, okay, I can, instead of putting my orders into my car, I can walk them to the post office. I can walk down to the coffee shop just for a change of scenery to get a cup of tea. And instead of walking home the same way that I came, I can do a longer walk home. So instead of it taking me 5 minutes, it takes me 20 minutes, and I sip on my coffee while I'm doing that. Have walking meetings instead of coffee meetings or lunches. Like if you've got a friend nearby that you meet up with every now and then for coffee, why don't you meet up and go for a walk? Walk around the house while you're on the phone. I find this is a great one to do. In my previous gig, we had a lot of phone meetings, and I would just go into my basement and I would walk all around my basement the whole time I was on the phone. And some of those meetings could go on for like 45 minutes, an hour, and I'd just be walking. I'd put myself on mute so people couldn't hear what was going on, and I'd just unmute myself when it was my turn to talk. If you find it boring, put your headphones on, listen to a book that transports you to another world. I always find reading and listening to books gives me a lot of inspiration. Same with podcasts, or just some good tunes, or try no headphones at all. Sometimes just listening to the sound of the world around you can be enough. And don't let the weather stop you. I live in Vancouver. It rains here all the time. If I waited for it to be a nice day, I would never leave my house in the winter. So get an umbrella, get a good rain jacket, even in the snow. Try and get out there. Just get out there and move. Another tip is to move your work environment around, if at all possible. So try working in different parts of the house for different tasks. Or go to a cafe, or if you've got a friend with a studio who can spare a little space, go work in their studio one day a week. Or instead of answering emails in your studio, take your laptop down to the coffee shop and do emails there, or do them in your kitchen, or just sometimes just physically putting yourself in a different part of the house can really change your point of view. So it's worth trying. I'm also just going to say that I award bonus points if you move around outside. There is something about being outdoors, about being in some green space. If you are in the city, it's harder. If at all possible, try and find yourself a park or a trail or somewhere where you can just get away from everything and let Mother Nature soothe your soul. Another great thing that you can try is sitting on your deck or doing some gardening. I find gardening really therapeutic. Something about getting my hands dirty and being outdoors and being very physical with the earth really helps me when I'm starting to feel a little stressed or a little burnt out or just not myself. The next one I'm going to mention is meditation. And some of you are probably saying that's a little too woo-woo for me, but just hang on for a second. I'm not a woo-woo person, but meditation every day, or focused breathing, or uninterrupted mindful thought, or whatever you want to call it that you're comfortable with, has been a game changer for me. It's one of those things that you're not really sure if it's working until you stop doing it. And that's when you realize it was working far more than you thought it was. Meditation is a great tool for clearing out our heads. It teaches us how to use our breathing to anchor ourselves in the present and to help calm ourselves down when we're anxious or overwhelmed or angry. Meditating in the morning can open up your brain for the day, and meditating in the afternoon can help you put the workday behind you so that you can be fully present for your family or your friends in the evening. I was one of those people who was very skeptical about the whole meditation thing until I started doing it, and I became very dedicated to it when I was going through this whole issue of burnout. I'm a very emotional person, and I tend to wear my emotions on my sleeve. And this is part of what makes me very good at what I do. But it also means that I tend to feel things, whether that's happiness or sadness or anger. I tend to feel them very deeply, often to the point where it can be really overwhelming for me. That personality trait can make me very high strung and all over the place, which can be very frustrating for me, but also for the people who are close to me. And so I've found that by doing meditation every day, it helps keep me on an even keel. I still feel all the same emotions, but I'm not as reactive to them as I would be without meditation, and I don't constantly feel overwhelmed by my emotions. So I use Headspace. There are lots of other apps out there. Yoga is another tool that can help. It's very meditative. There's also certain activities you can do that can help with focused thought if you don't necessarily like the idea of meditation. So yoga is definitely one of them. Focus on your breath, focus on the movements. Running is another one. It's a very repetitive exercise that can be very, very meditative if you enjoy it. Not everybody enjoys running. I used to run a lot when I was younger. My knees don't deal with it so well now, but I was a regular runner and I found it very meditative. I didn't realize it at the time that that's what it was, but there was just something about the rhythm of my feet, of hearing my feet hit the pavement, that really calmed me down, and just the rhythm, everything about it. But there's lots of other activities you can do with your hands that can be very meditative, and these can be things like doodling or coloring, knitting, needlework, woodworking, gardening, especially weeding, that can be really great. And when you're doing these things, put your devices away and just focus on the task at hand. Just like you're doing one step and then the next step. You're knitting one stitch, then you're knitting the next stitch. And the key to it is doing it regularly. Another one that I find really helpful is actually washing dishes, like the old-fashioned way, in the sink with soap. There's just something about the water and the act of like just washing the dishes that just gets my mind flowing very freely. The next one is getting a good night's sleep, and I know this can be so hard if you're a parent with young children. I get it. And sometimes there are just phases in life that you have to get through. And it can be tough. But, we've heard sleep referred to as the wonder drug, and it really is, because our bodies need sleep. Like, that's actually a form of torture, not allowing somebody to sleep. And more studies are coming out talking about the physical and the mental benefits of sleep, as well as telling us that we're not getting enough. But if you are struggling with sleep and, taking away outside factors like having young children or going through a very stressful situation or something, but if you are somebody who struggles with sleep, or you're suddenly experiencing unexplained sleep difficulties, it could be worth getting checked out by a doctor. And I've had friends who have gone through this, and they've visited a sleep clinic, and it's amazing how just a few small changes to their daily routine vastly improves their sleep quality. So if that is something that is a struggle for you, it could be worth getting that checked out. If there are no physical or mental issues in your way, and you just know you're just not getting enough sleep because there's just simply not enough hours in the day, start looking at ways you can rejig things. You might not be able to go from 6 hours a night to 8 hours a night, but can you go from 6 to 6.5? Can you carve out another 30 minutes by going to bed earlier, or by meal prepping lunches or breakfast, or getting your kids' clothes together the night before? Like, start looking for ways that you can just start to claw back some extra minutes. One thing that I stopped doing is I stopped using like snooze, because I just found that if I can hit snooze 3 or 4 times, why not just set my alarm for 20 minutes later and enjoy 20 minutes of solid sleep time? Because usually that's more beneficial to me. The next one on the list is digital detoxing. Digital detoxing is something we all need to be doing more of. There are so many studies out there that talk about all the horrible things that social media and being constantly connected do to our brains. There is a lot to be said for putting your phone down for a few hours and walking away from it. Even putting away your screen for an hour before bed, that's actually something that can help you get a better night's sleep. Because how many of us have gotten into bed and picked up our phone and started scrolling through Instagram, and the next thing you know, an hour has gone by and you could have been sleeping. So put your phone down an hour before going to bed and start weaning yourself off of it. Putting away your screens for a day or two can also be really enlightening. If you've never done this before, it can be extremely uncomfortable. I know, because the first time I did it, it was eye-opening. Like almost withdrawal symptoms, like just getting anxious and like just reaching to pick up my phone without even realizing I'm doing it. All those little pings, aka dopamine hits, they serve a very important purpose. They are designed to make us feel like we're important and wanted and needed and liked. And the minute we hear them, we have to find out what it is. There's that fear that we're missing something. Like, my phone pinged at me. If I don't pick it up, I'm missing something. But then what happens? You open your phone, you read the email, and you realize that it was somebody who wants something from you right now. Or you look at the social media comment and it's something that makes you feel small and worthless. And those are not good things. And they're especially not good if you're on the verge of burnout. So learning to disconnect and manage my screen time was one of the hardest things I had to do on my journey back from burnout, but it has been one of the most important and one of the most beneficial. So nowadays, I only get text notifications on my phone, mainly because, my mom. And that's it. I don't get Instagram notifications. I don't get Facebook notifications. I don't even have my work email on my phone. I only have my work email on my laptop, and I only check it twice a day, unless I'm in an ongoing conversation with a client about something specific. But other than that, I check it twice a day, in the morning and before I wrap up. Sometimes I will check it at lunch. Okay, there's nothing going on that is so urgent that you need to respond in less than 8 hours. The thing is, once you start doing this regularly and you stop getting the notifications about what you're missing out on, you stop caring if you're missing out. You actually start to live your life again. So I would suggest that you try to have at least one day a week where you disconnect fully from all your screens. Make it easy on yourself and make it a weekend day to start out, so that you can be fully present with your family or with your friends. Try to find ways to disconnect for longer periods, like a vacation or a long weekend, and see how you do there. I guarantee you, if you go on vacation, there's going to become a point where you just leave your phone behind because you're on vacation. Limit your social media throughout the day. You don't need to see what's going on every 5 seconds. And I am so bad at this. I'm going to just confess, I'm so bad at this. I actually use a tool called Forest that I have on my phone and on my desktop that stops me from going to social media sites or social media apps, because if I do, I'm going to kill the little tree that I'm growing. And I don't want to kill the tree. So, if gamifying it helps, then try that as well. There's lots of tools out there that can help you with that. As I mentioned, checking emails only during designated times, and only respond to emails that you deem to be urgent, not that others deem urgent. Okay? There's a saying that somebody else's failure to plan is not your responsibility. Like, it doesn't make it urgent for you. That's their problem. Set aside a dedicated time or a designated time to catch up with all the other emails that aren't urgent. So you might want to do that a couple times a week, where you respond to inquiries or whatever the case may be. If you do get a lot of inquiries on a daily basis, so that setting aside time for them a couple times a week is not enough, it might be time to look at hiring a virtual assistant or somebody who can help you with that. You also want to try and spend time on your digital detox days doing things completely removed from your business. So that might be when you create just for the pure joy of it. That might be when you spend the day in your garden. That might be when you go out and do errands, or just try and remove yourself from your business for a brief period of time. For me, I do it on Sundays. I'm not religious or anything. It's just Sundays is the day that kind of made the most sense for me. And on Sundays, I don't really check in on my screens. I've started to do that a little more though, and I have to put a stop to it. Sundays are the days where I spend time creating for myself, or I spend them in the garden, or I go hiking, or I try to see friends, or I just try to completely remove myself from work. Give yourself time to be bored. And we recorded an episode on this a while back, and I will put a link to it in the show notes. But sometimes the best ideas come when you are bored out of your mind. Think back to when you were a kid on summer holidays and you would complain to your mom that you were bored, and your mom would say, "Find something to do, or I will find something for you to do." And you knew that whatever she found was going to be horrible. So you'd use that as a little bit of motivation to go find something to do. And that's usually probably when you were most creative as a kid. That's probably when you went and started, I don't know, when I was a kid, that was when we would go out and we'd start playing Star Wars or we would play in the sandbox, or I would make something. I was always cutting things out and gluing things together. So give yourself time to be bored. That's when sometimes the best inspiration comes out. Get help with tasks that you don't love. This is another big one to help you out. One of the things when you first start out running your own business is that cash can be very limited, and it can be hard to justify spending money on additional help. But as soon as you're able to find a few extra dollars a month to offload some tasks that you really dislike or that keep you from spending much needed time with your family or friends or looking after yourself, do it. This is actually known as buying back your time. Your one finite resource. Time is finite. And if you're in a position where you can start to buy chunks of it back, I highly recommend it. So a few ways that you can do this are you can hire a virtual assistant, like I already mentioned. And sometimes a VA might only cost you $100 a month. Like it might only just be 4 hours a month that you need somebody to just take some things off your hands. It could be 1 or 2 tasks that you don't like doing, like your email or your bookkeeping. And you can use those 4 hours to go get a massage or watch a movie or just something that's just for you. The same can be said for like a house cleaning or a yard care service. You know, if you hate cleaning your house, get somebody to help you with it. In my local community, in our local Facebook group, there are always people offering house cleaning and landscaping services for people who don't want to mow the lawn or do the weed whacking. So, you know, bringing somebody in a couple times a month can take those tasks away from you so you don't have to do them on your day off. Instead, you can spend your day off with your family. A bookkeeper is another example. Bookkeeper was one of the very first tasks I outsourced because I hate it, and I could pay somebody $25 an hour to do it for me in a quarter of the time that it would take me. So I would be paying her for an hour to do something that would take me 4 hours. So $25 to buy back 4 hours of my time and have her only spend an hour of her time. That's a good deal. That's a good investment. 1 or 2 days a week of childcare, particularly during the summer. If this is a possibility for you, just so that you have a couple of really focused days to work without interruptions and maybe get more done than you would on a normal day. And it doesn't have to be like in the summer, maybe it's just a local babysitter. It doesn't have to be necessarily a licensed daycare. Could you bring in a kid in the neighborhood who's looking to make a few extra dollars during the summer for 2 days a week? Meal prep services, that's another one. There's all kinds of them out there. I'm constantly getting ads on my Facebook for them. Could one of those work for you? On the other hand, I know other people who find cooking and prepping meals to be very meditative and relaxing. So it's going to be different for everybody, but just start identifying the things that you don't like to do and figuring out if there's ways that you can outsource them. Another one that I want to bring up, and this is hugely important, is filling your creative well. So back when I mentioned creative rhythms and learning about, the highs and the lows and how you can't have one without the other, I mentioned that the lows can seem really low until you learn to trust that the next wave is going to come. One of the things you can do during those lows is make the most of them. This is where you can fill your creative well. And it's something that all creatives need to take time to do. I think it's so important that you should actually schedule it in your calendar. Almost like a training session. You know how like an athlete, they play their game, that's the big show, but they have all these practices and training sessions in the meantime. That's what filling your creative well is for a creative. That's your practice session. That's your training session. That's where you are prepping for the big game, which is doing your client work or creating products or whatever it is that you're doing that brings in the money, right? The truth is that you simply can't keep draining your creative well without replenishing it. It just doesn't work that way. If you do that, it's just going to run dry. And when it runs dry, that's when burnout starts to set in. So you need to make sure you take the time, particularly during those lows when you've finished a project and you've come off that high and you sort of need that downtime before you ramp up for the next project. That's when you can go out and start filling your creative well. And the cool thing about that is very often the next wave seems to come along a lot faster when you're out there actively filling your creative well than when you're sitting there despairing that you're never going to work ever again. And the best part about filling your creative well is it's fun. And I think this is one of the reasons why we put it off, because it feels like we're goofing off. It feels like we're fooling around, like we're not really doing work. But it's truly one of the best things about being a creative. And I don't want you to feel guilty about it, because it is 100% necessary. So here's some things you can do to help you fill that creative well. A big one is journaling. And there's so many ways you can journaling. If journaling just makes your skin crawl, hear me out. There's so many different ways you can journal. It doesn't have to be about your feelings. And I'll give you a few suggestions here. One of the most well-known ways in the creative community is Julia Cameron's morning pages. And this is the idea of doing 3 pages of free writing every morning with a pen and paper, not on a laptop, not with a keyboard. It's also one of those things like meditation that doesn't feel like it's actually doing something at first, but once you get going, you realize how powerful it is. And in many ways, it can also almost be like a manifestation tool. And this is where I have found doing things like this extremely beneficial. I have found that when I sit down and write things down with a pen and paper, whether I'm making up a story or writing down my goals, there's something about that hand to paper to pen activity or action that somehow makes it stick in my subconscious, so that my brain is constantly working on it, even when I don't think it is. And it's so crazy how often those things that I write down, either fictionally or non-fictionally, for lack of better words, those things tend to actually come to life. So I highly recommend doing some kind of journaling. There's other types of journals, and one that I also do is a gratitude journal. And there is some science behind the importance of practicing gratitude and how it contributes to our overall happiness. And there have been studies done that have shown that people who do practice daily gratitude, who do tend to be overall more happy. And I have certainly found that to be the case for me. And it's something that I do daily. I take a few minutes every day to write 3 things down that happened that I am grateful for. And sometimes it could be something as simple as like, I'm grateful for the fact that I can have enough money to buy groceries every week. Or it could be something really silly, like I'm grateful for the fact that Skip the Dishes exists, because there's times where it's just like, I don't want to leave the house and it would be really nice if somebody would bring me some food. So, all different kinds of gratitude. You can also have a goal setting journal. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is where you set your goals and you journal the steps and the actions you're taking to achieve those goals. There's 5-minute journals. This is where you just take 5 minutes of your day and you just write whatever. You write about your day or write about what you're thinking, but no more than 5 minutes. There's also art journals, and this is one of my favorite things to do. This is actually, I combine art journaling with my gratitude journal. So I create journal spreads with collaging and paper, and then I fill them in with my gratitude blurbs for each day. So I combine the two, and I find it a really great creative and almost meditative outlet for me. So lots of different ways you can do that. Another way you can fill your creative well is an artist date. And this is another idea that came from Julia Cameron and her program, The Artist's Way, which has been around for decades. And quite frankly, if you have not checked it out, I do recommend it. It's a tremendous tool to help with coping with burnout. I have found it extremely useful, and I still revisit it to this day. And it will cost you about the price of her book and 12 weeks of your time. It's really, really useful tool. Anyway, the concept behind an artist date is that once a week you take your inner artist out on a date. And the idea is that your inner artist is basically a child who can act very immature at times. And you need to indulge that inner child from time to time. So you take your inner artist out on a date, just you and them. And it can be an hour, it can be an afternoon, or it can be an entire day. And you focus your date entirely on filling your creative well. So you could be doing things like visiting an art gallery or a museum. You could go for a picnic in the park with a good book, a good fiction book, something you can lose yourself in. It could be people watching. If you're an artist, that's a great thing to do to help fill your creative well. It could be wandering a neighborhood that you're not familiar with. If you live in the burbs or the country, visit the city for a day. If you live in the city, leave the city behind and head out to the burbs or out to the country. Look at the things that you're surrounded by in that new environment. The patterns, the colors, the smells, those are all inspiration that you can use to fill your creative well. Go to a movie you really want to see in the middle of the day on a work day. It's one of my favorite things to do. Buy some physical magazines that inspire you and sit in a cafe reading them with a frothy drink that you wouldn't normally buy and something tasty to eat. And if you don't have the funds to do that, go to your local library. They have all kinds of magazines that you can pull out and read right there in the library, and it doesn't cost you a penny. Eat in a restaurant that's out of your comfort zone. So I don't eat out a lot right now because I don't have the funds to do it while I'm ramping up with a new business. But one of the things that I do is my grocery store where I live, my local grocery store, has a huge brand new international section. It takes up almost half of the grocery section. And so one of the things I do every week when I go through it is I wander through it and I pick out one new item every week to try that I have never had before. So it could be something Indian, it could be something Thai, it could be something Greek, it could be whatever, just something that catches my eye that I've never had before, and I take it home and I try it. So yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do to kind of fill that well. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Another thing you can do is try exploring different mediums from the one that you work in. So if you are a visual artist, let's say that you mainly focus on watercolors, maybe you want to start experimenting with oil painting or gouache, or you want to bring multimedia into your work. So you're using pencil crayons or markers as well. If you are a singer-songwriter and you tend to focus in the heavy metal realm, maybe try writing a country music song. There's a great guy on YouTube who does this all the time. He takes songs in particular genres and he recreates them as if he was a band in another genre. I'm going to have to try and find it. I'm subscribed to him because it's really cool. And he kind of goes between emo rock and country music. So he'll take country songs and turn them into what it would sound like if Blink 182 was singing it. And then he'll take a Blink 182 song and do it as if it was a country artist. And it's really, really well done. He's very talented. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes because that's exactly what I'm talking about here, is do what you normally do, but do it with something different. Use a different tool, use a different medium, and see what happens. If you work in the digital realm, if you're a digital content creator, move yourself to the physical realm. Pick up a crochet kit or an embroidery kit and try that out. Look at blogs or YouTube channels that are completely different niches than you. YouTube is a wealth of artists on there who are sharing the work that they're doing. And so I follow a sculptor, I follow some collage artists, I follow some painters, and I don't really do any of those mediums. I am kind of a pen and ink pen, ink and marker artist, but I love seeing what other people are doing, and I always get ideas from it. So that's a great one to do. Another one that I'm going to mention, and I have mentioned it in the past, and this is my voice is going because I don't normally talk this much in one fell swoop, but this is the art of collaboration. And this for me is a huge one. Nothing gets my creative juices going more than finding somebody to collaborate with who is as enthusiastic, passionate, and curious about things as I am. I find that I really thrive in that environment. As much as I love having my own business and being the one who gets to call the shots, I love getting to work with other creatives. That's a huge part of why I do this podcast, because I get to collaborate with creatives every week. It's one of the reasons I record with Heather, because there is just something about when I sit down and talk with Heather and the way things bounce back and forth between us. I almost always walk away from our conversations with some kind of idea for something I can do or try. It is huge for me, and I highly recommend. I know a lot of us tend to be introverted and shy, but try and find some people who kind of resonate with you and see if you can find a way to collaborate together. You don't have to work in the same mediums. Sometimes that can even be more interesting, is to collaborate with somebody who works in a completely different medium from you and figuring out how you can bring those two things together. So there's loads of opportunities out there. And the cool thing is that, believe it or not, there is more than enough creativity to go around. And so there's no reason for us to be selfish with our particular creative gifts. Join forces, team up. Magical things can happen when you do that. And some of my all-time favorite projects have been projects where I've teamed up with another creative to do something. So I highly recommend that as a tool. So bringing this all together, I know that as I have talked for the last hour and a bit, that I haven't shared anything earth-shattering or new. It's all stuff I had heard many times before, and it was all stuff that I knew I should be doing. But the thing of it is that maintenance can be boring because when we're doing it regularly, it never feels like we're doing anything. It's like backing up your hard drive every night. You know you should do it, but you know what? What's one more day without a backup? It'll be fine until one day it isn't. It's kind of like, you know how you sweep your kitchen floor or you mop your kitchen floor at the end of every day? So you never really have any crumbs on your kitchen floor because you're doing it every day. But if you left it for 2 or 3 weeks, your kitchen floor would be disgusting. It's so important. It's so important. And it's one of those things I can't even convince you of how important it is until you go through something like this for yourself. It took me being caught up in a year-long spiral of burnout that did lead to depression before I finally understood that I need to do these things every day, not just for a week or a month until I start to feel a little bit better, but I need to do them every day forever. And I had to learn it the hard way. And hopefully by sharing my story and the things that worked for me, this will help you if you find yourself in that place so that you can climb out much faster than I did and get back to being more creatively present. And I will just mention 4 books that have really helped me on my creative journey. And one of them is The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp. I've mentioned it a few times, and I did a giveaway around our 100th episode of 2 copies, which have been mailed off to their recipients. I hope they've received them by now. Another one is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which I have mentioned a few times in this episode. I'll put links to all of these in the show notes. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. That is a very well-known book in the creative world. If you haven't had an opportunity to read it, I highly recommend it. It's very short. It's a very skinny little book, but I 100% guarantee that parts of it will resonate with you. And another book that I found particularly helpful was Within the Frame by David Duchemin, who I also mentioned in this episode. He was the one who talked about the creative rhythms and the wave action. And I'll put a link to that blog post and to his book in the show notes. So essentially what I'm hoping here is that by hearing my story and hearing about what I had to do to get out of it, I'm hoping that it will help as many of you as possible who might be finding that they're just feeling flat, or you're just starting, you can feel those early tendrils of burnout starting to creep in, the little whispers, because that's often how it starts, just a little bit of dissatisfaction or just not feeling quite right, and it's sort of whirling around in the back of your brain. And hopefully you can use some of these tools to pull yourself back out and get yourself on a steady course. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. These are things that we need to be doing every day. We really do need to treat our bodies like we are professional athletes, because if we're not mentally sharp and physically sharp, it impacts our ability to earn a living. More importantly, our ability to earn a living doing something we really love. Like, I love what I do. And I want to be able to keep doing it for as long as physically and mentally possible. And I really want that to be a very, very long time. So yes, and every now and then we start to slip a little bit. I find myself doing this. I mentioned that I was getting into a bad habit with social media again. And it's really important to have regular check-ins with yourself where you ask yourself, like, how am I doing on all these things? How am I looking after myself? Am I getting too far down a rabbit hole here? And do I need to pull myself back out? And taking the time to pull yourself back out. So that is it for this week. I really hope that some of you found this helpful and useful. And if you feel that you are having some challenges with burnout, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to talk a little more in depth about what I went through and how I got myself back out, and, help in any way that I can. But for now, I will be back next week with another brand new episode. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.